Perfect. Okay. So I wanted to do a little talk on weight loss because often it's something that I will avoid talking about because it can be done in a way that's not super healthy, like mentally or physically. But then I also realized that I was kind of doing a disservice not talking it because it is something that can be a goal and is important to a lot of people. And whenever I started kind of diving into my own past too, where I got into a really unhealthy habit with binge eating and things like that. A big part of that was healing my relationship with food. But then whenever I dug a little farther, it's like probably a lot of those behaviors around food and the controlling aspect around foods and things like that probably snuck in because I had this desire to lose a couple pounds and didn't know how to go about it. So I kept thinking that I'd like go completely perfect and then I'd go off track and then it would be this big roller coaster ride and then that over time coupled with a lot of other stuff led to, periods of overeating and not feeling well. So it was important to go through a season two where weight loss wasn't the focus. But I've realized that it's okay to have a goal of looking after our physical body and sometimes weight loss is a part of that. And even sometimes to just have body composition goals because we're curious to see what it takes or what it feels like, or just because we have an aesthetic goal that we want to get after, and that there's no right or wrong goals. And so I'm just here to help support that we can do it in a way that doesn't feel like such a struggle and also doesn't feel like such a battle with our own body. Like it's something that we're doing with our body instead of against it, if that makes any sense. So
Mhm, yes.
yeah, perfect. I just wanted to show a cute picture of my cat, so that was that. That was me. But so the biggest thing I learned because I feel more comfortable talking about weight loss as a topic too, because I had gone through all those different seasons. I talk about it like seasons because I find it important to recognize that not everything is black and white. There's not things that are good or bad. It all depends on how it fits in and what seasons it's in. And in a visual, I always talk to people and say, like, just think of snow pants. Like in a winter season, freaking great. But if we're trying to hang on and hold on to that tool of snow pants in the desert in June, it's like it's not that it itself is good or bad, but in that scenario, it's not a very good tool, you know? So about kind of taking away that black and white judgment of certain things and figuring out, okay, what season am I in? What do I need? What's important for this like moment right now? So I had gone through all those different seasons of healing a relationship with food where the tool for that was not having the focus of the main priority being weight loss. And it was about healing my relationship with food and figuring out what it takes to feel good and heal my digestion. And then I got to a point where I felt really comfortable around food, and there wasn't any periods anymore of like overeating, and food was a joy and it wasn't a stressor. And I had an idea of what my physical body needed to kind of feel good and what it was about food that I found enjoyment in, things like that. So then I got to this season where I was like, okay, now I'm kind of like I'm coming at this new goal of being curious about body composition changes and like going through a calorie deficit to see weight loss out more out of curiosity to be like I kind of want to know what it feels like if I like dial in my nutrition and give it all I got, you know? And it came from a place of I'm already really grateful and happy with my body and what it does for me. And now I'm just curious to kind of experiment and see what can happen and what it feels like. And that was a really pivotal moment where it wasn't this idea of weight loss equals happiness. Like I had done a lot of the work to be like, okay, I'm really like proud and grateful of my body and what it does and accepting of it. And sometimes we fear accepting and being grateful and proud of our body means we're complacent and that we don't want to challenge ourselves and change. But it's actually the opposite. Like when we appreciate and are grateful and love ourselves, we get it's like with a kid. If they wanted to be a vet and they came home with like poor scores on their math test, you can love them and be kind to them and also encourage them to do the uncomfortable work of like taking that extra course or getting a tutor. Loving them and being kind to them doesn't mean going, oh, well, whatever, it's fine. Like we love you anyways. It's like, of course we love you anyways, but if it's important to you and you want to be a vet, then like, all right, let's get into it. These are the things that we can do about it. So it was this idea of changing the idea from like I'll be happy when I lose weight. So then it's always this like target that's away for us. And then we think that weight loss is going to give us something. It's going to give us confidence and it's going to give us happiness. So then we end up on this roller coaster ride because it turns into this willpower battle. And then once we get there, there's the like I noticed there's this really crazy shift where if we're doing it for the wrong reasons or we expect that a change in our body is going to give us some change in our state just because we're fitting in this mental image in our mind, we end up like trading one devil for the other. It's like the anxiety of wanting to change just gets replaced by the fear of it getting taken away from you. So then you're still left feeling kind of this discomfort in your body because you're like, oh my God, well, if I'm only feeling this confidence now because I got a six pack or whatever, it's like what happens if my body changes again? Then I'm going through this whole roller coaster ride again of emotions and feeling unhappy with myself. So it was really curious to see that side of things that it's like we got to get that confidence in ourselves beforehand, even though that sounds counterintuitive, but because we'll just be replacing one burden with another. Like the wishful thinking and the wanting of change will just be replaced by the anxiety of like losing the results once we have them. So we're still left in that state of like unhappiness, if that makes sense. So I always like bringing this as the starting point to think of it as like kind of the pre-diet checklist. Like, are we ready to have these external measures as a marker of success? And there can be a point where we're like, yeah, okay, I'm ready. Like I'm in a good spot for that physically and mentally. And on the physical side of things, it's important also to go through this kind of like pre-diet checklist too, because our body, remember, its like sole purpose is wanting to protect and love you. Like survival is its key thing. So losing weight when it comes to survival is a very big stressor and it wants to kind of fight against that. So think of it as it's a stressor. So to make it hard on ourselves, if going through the stressor of trying to be in a deficit to make weight loss while our physical and mental health life is already crazy stressed out, it's like probably not a good season for that. So there's kind of this checklist to make sure that our body is in a good space that it's like, okay, I feel safe enough to go burn through these fat stores. It's not that it's impossible. Like Cody just ran 900 kilometers and he lost 20 pounds in 2 weeks. Like, even though his body was crazy stressed, if you're in a calorie deficit for a long enough period of time, regardless, like it will turn into weight loss. But what we're trying to achieve is not just a lower number on the scale. We usually want weight loss and looking toned and all those things because of what we think it'll give us is feeling good, feeling energized, feeling confident, and all those things. If you just saw the weight go down on the scale, then you're like constipated and felt like crap and depressed. It's like doesn't super feel like that would be a win, you know? So you want to first be making sure that your body's in a good place to go through the stressor of having to use those like survival stores, you know? So making sure that you're sleeping well, that you have a regular appetite. You know, if you have absolutely no appetite or you're hungry all the time, those can be clues that your body's not in a state where it feels like it's getting everything it needs. You want to feel that you're well hydrated, so your body's not in a stressor thinking that there's not enough water coming in. And your hormones are a good predictor too. Like you might not want to put it through a, the idea of a calorie deficit where you're just like the only goal is taking things away if you're having a bunch of like PMS or issues with your cycles. And then sometimes, the argument comes in, it's like, okay, well, weight loss will help with all those things because losing weight can really improve our health in a lot of different ways. But the only thing I'm saying here is to not have the changes on the scale be the measure of success while going through these things. So you can go and attack all these things of being like, okay, I want to improve my energy, I want to improve my PMS, I want to improve my sleep, and I want to improve my mood and all these things and have those as the focus. And oftentimes what will happen is like you'll naturally see weight loss because of all the things you do to achieve that. ends up being the things that give your body the nourishment it needs and not the inflammation of overeating and things like that. It's just the only difference is changing the focus because consistency is like the thing that matters the most. And often is if the only goal that we have is changing on the scale, because that fluctuates like crazy and it also takes a long period of time, when that's our only measure of success, it gets very easy to like F it, give up after 3 weeks whenever we hit like a little plateau or a fluctuation. So that's why I like to encourage people to start by making changes in their diet and in their lifestyle, but with the first goal of like setting their body up for success by, regulating their appetite, getting their sleep in, making sure they're having enough protein for their workouts and exercising routinely and feeling good and improving their energy. Like having those as the focuses. So the other ones that I like to look at is um, having consistent energy throughout the day. And it comes back to this. It's like doing all these things, you'll probably, if weight loss is what your body needs in a for health reasons, you'll probably see weight loss while addressing all of these things. But it's easier to stay consistent because there's so many other feedback cues versus only being focused on weight loss. Making sure we have an understanding of nutrition is really helpful because instead of like say we have a poor diet that our blood sugar's all over the place, we're not having enough protein, we're dehydrated and eating mostly processed foods or whatever, and then we're like, okay, I'm going to lose weight, so I got to go on a deficit. So I'm just going to take away from that. We're adding even more stress to the body because it's not getting the energy it needs. And then you're also encountering nutrient deficiencies that will show up with negative outcomes in the future. So that's what leads to inconsistent weight loss. It's not that people usually have problems with weight loss. People have seen weight loss go up. It's this idea of being able to maintain it for a long time. So these are the important things to avoid that yo-yo spiral. So if you can get all these basics like nailed down, then whenever it comes to just adjusting your calorie intake to match your calorie expenditure, it just feels like tiny little tweaks instead of this like giant overhaul. Or just trying to eat less and then you're suffering with like constipation, low energy, feeling moody, no energy for workouts, hormones are all over the place. And then consistency with sticking to that deficit becomes really, really difficult. The other thing we want to make sure that it's going well is your digestion. Because if we just willy-nilly just start taking things away, then we can get into a rut with some of our digestion things that can cause more inflammation and that can be a stressor for the body. So then the process of losing weight gets harder and harder. And then stress is a big one. We want to make sure that we have stress management techniques in place because a big thing that leads to weight gain tends to be emotional eating or stress eating. So if that's the case, and then we're like, okay, well, I'm going to lose weight. And so we start to control the food, then we take away the one thing that was helping us cope with stress. We're opening up a can of worms for A, not being able to stick with it, and B, our life just being not feeling well and not enjoying it. So we have to make sure that if we want to see the results and maintain them, we got to make sure that we have other tools in place to handle emotional eating and stress eating and things like that. Because otherwise, our willpower eventually will fade and we'll go back to all our old habits and then boom. Every time we consecutively lose and gain weight, we're impacting our metabolism and it's making it harder and harder on ourselves every single time. So that's why it's really important to get these things in line first. So then weight loss doesn't feel so hard and then our body's ready for it. Now, when we get into the nitty-gritty stuff about weight loss, is in simple terms, because it can get really confusing, because people will try to sell a lot of different things by talking about like, hey, it's your hormones or it's like insulin resistance or it's over exercising or things like that. So it gets really stressful. But when it comes down to like the actual laws of it, is that we need to be intaking less calories than our body is expending for there to be weight loss. So the clear-cut way of being like, am I in a calorie deficit is, am I losing weight? And often it can feel like we can get frustrated because like, man, I feel like I'm like barely eating anything and I can't lose weight. So, back to the simple things like if we're not losing weight, it means we're not in a deficit. So if we're eating so little food and still not losing weight, that means that maybe we've had a roller coaster up and down lifestyle with like diets. So that's impacted our metabolism. It's like slowed down how much we like naturally burn at rest, or we've gone through so many up and down diets that we've lost some lean muscle mass. So our the amount our body needs to like maintain its weight gets so low, or or we have a really sedentary lifestyle, so we need very little and we eat some sneaky like processed foods that are high in calories, so it feels like we're not eating a lot, but we're still eating more energy than our body needs. So we have these two factors to play with where we there's different things that impact energy in and different things that impact energy out. Because sometimes if it feels like we're like, man, I'm trying like so hard and I just can't get the scale to move, sometimes it's our um inaccuracies with tracking how much is coming in. Because that, unless we're like weighing and measure everything, and even that's not a perfect science, but one of the common things that I see happen is that so what we need is a calorie deficit over a long period of time because our body has to like go through those stores. Think about it like if you had money in your checkings account and then money in your savings account and then money in like a lockbox somewhere. You constantly go through the money that's in your checkings account. Oh, and then when that's empty, then you go through your savings up, and then when that's empty, you go through your lockbox. But every time money's coming into your checkings, you don't need to go to your lockbox. You know what I mean? So, say a really common thing that happens is let's imagine this is like a rough estimate, but it takes a 3,500 calorie deficit to equal 1 pound fat loss. So on average, like a 10 to 20% deficit for like a 2,000 calorie diet, which is like average for adult women, depending on our activity levels, but still. So say you're in a deficit of 250 calories a day, Monday to Thursday. So that's 1,000 calorie deficit by Thursday. But then you're like, you go out for drinks with the friends. And I think I actually wrote it down some ideas here. Yeah, okay. So say you're in a deficit Monday to Thursday, 250 calories a day. So that means you're in 1,000 calorie deficit. Here's how easy 1,000 calories can sneak in over a weekend where you're like, yeah, and oh, well, I already went out and had a drink and a dessert with the girls on Friday. Um, and so, oh, then you have a late night. You didn't sleep really well, so your cravings really hard the next day. So then you go and have a brunch, and you have a mimosa, hair of the dog, and then like a latte, and so that's another 500 calories. And then maybe you go into like, especially you're feeling tired or you were stressed from the weekend. Then you can get into like F it. I'll just like I'll start fresh Monday. And so then by the end of the weekend, it's very easy to sneak in those 1,000 calories that was your deficit. So now you're just stuck at maintenance again. So that's what happens often where it's like, I feel like I'm working so hard, but like nothing's happening, is that the deficit has to be sustained on average over a long period of time. And when we're just focusing like on the scale weight, it can be very easy to, it's like say it goes down, we're like, oh, we're doing good. Okay, so I'm gonna go like get a treat because we're rocking it, or it stays stuck and not move and go like, F it, whatever. I'll just like try again whenever this January 1st or whatnot. So then it's the consistency that's like the big key. So the biggest things that are helpful, because sometimes we can focus just on the food, and there's nothing that goes against that law of like thermodynamics that we need to intake like less energy in than we expend, but there's so many things that like impact that. Our sleep, like if you've ever noticed, if you had a poor day of sleep, you wake up the next day and you're craving carbs like hard. So the consistency, which is the key, gets hard. So that's why it's important to like pay attention to sleep. Or if you have a really sedentary life, it's harder to get into a calorie deficit because you just end up you have to eat less, and if you don't want to have any nutritional like deficiencies, there's less flexibility for those fun foods because you got to get in the nutrients you need. But the amount of energy your body needs because we're sitting at a desk all day is quite low. And it's very easy. Like if you've ever weighed out a serving of like oil or peanut butter or chips or ice cream, like the serving sizes that they have written is never a serving size that I've ever eaten. It's like the natural tendency is to eat like three servings as an actual servings. So we can look at the thing and be like, oh yeah, it's only 250 calories. But like I'm never gonna eat just 10 chips, you know? It's so sometimes it's really hard to be mindful of what's actually coming in. So that's a good thing to like get curious about is actually weigh and measure for like 1 week just out of curiosity. 'Cause sometimes we're like, I remember I put, oh yeah, a teaspoon of butter where I put on my was buttering my toast, and then I was like, oh wow, there's way more because it practically disappears when it's melting, you know what I mean? And then there's the oil when you're cooking the eggs. And then if you've ever actually like it's usually 2 tablespoons of peanut butter when you're putting stuff on. So we can be inaccurate with what we think is coming in. And then the other thing that we can use to influence the energy that's coming in. This is why protein and fiber are so epic for like calorie deficits. One, because they make us feel full, which makes it easier to stick to being in a calorie deficit because we're not fighting hunger and our blood sugar's not all over the place. But two, they have a high impact on our metabolism. If you look at things that influence energy out, is the energy burned by metabolizing food. So it takes energy just to like process protein. So say we have 100 calories of protein, it takes calories to like digest it. And so you end up only consuming like 60 of those 100 calories and you feel full. So protein and fiber are super helpful to make things easier. I'm gonna go into some of these things that make it easier. Because when it comes to being in a calorie deficit, there's millions of different ways. What matters most is being in a calorie deficit over a sustained period of time. And to do it for a sustained period of time, it's easier when we're well slept, well nourished, lots of nutrients, so the cravings aren't all over the place. Um, High protein, so we're feel like high protein and fiber, so we're feeling full, well hydrated, so we're not tired and brain foggy. That makes it easier to stay consistent. Now, there's a million different ways to like get into a calorie deficit. So what matters most is that you find the approach that feels less restrictive for you. Some people find tracking their food and the macros is easier because they can like track in those the foods that are for fun and flavor and just find the right serving size that fits into their day while also hitting the protein and fiber targets that help them feel full. Other people, that's like such a stress and such a burden. So that's not the right approach to them because they can't stay consistent with it long enough to find out what a calorie deficit is. Other people find it way easier to even just focus on fasting, where they just skip a meal a day, but you have to pay attention to make sure you're like nourishing yourself at your other meals because remember, it's consistency over a long period of time that matters. And so after a while, like if you're not getting the nutrients you need, that the hunger and the cravings and the irritability will end up kicking you in the butt. You'll end up using food to cope and you won't be able to stick with it long enough to actually stay in a deficit long enough for your body to go into those lock boxes of stored energy. Another approach that tends to be really common in successful like weight loss stories is no snacking. One, because if you eliminate snacking, you eliminate an amount of calories, so that helps put you in a calorie deficit. But two, it also is easier to stay mindful about what you're eating when you only have like 2 or 3 times a day that you're eating versus if you're snacking multiple times throughout the day, it's really hard to know how much food is coming in. The other things that people do that work for them, that's why you see like vegan or paleo or high carb or low carb. All of these things work because they put you in a calorie deficit and they'll generally focus on having higher protein and higher fiber because that keeps you full. So it's easier because you're not dealing with so much hunger. So it's easier to stay in that deficit. So what some people will do, and it feels like it's like not even restricting at all, they'll be like, oh, whatever, I'm just gonna like not eat whatever day. I have different groups cut out different things, but it's not that there's like some fancy mechanism behind of removal of certain foods. It's just that them doing that helps them stay in a calorie deficit for a like extended period of time. So for some people, they're like, I don't want to weigh and track. I don't want to like fast or skip meals. And for them, just being like, oh, whatever, I'm just gonna like cut out booze and and treats. It's like for them, that's like easier and it takes way less thought. So it's about finding the things that work the best for you and that you can stick to. Because remember, what you need to do to see the results is what you need to do to maintain the results. So it's like, be careful about just cutting out all the foods that you enjoy. Because, yeah, you'll see weight loss in 30 days. But do you just want to put it back on the moment you start introducing those things again? Or would it be better for you to find, okay, what's the amount? Like, what are the trade-offs that I have to make to be able to enjoy this while also still being in a calorie deficit so that I can make this a lifestyle? And then the other type is like actually tracking it. So then you have an idea. It's not that it's a perfect science, but it brings more mindfulness into it. It's usually those mindless in between or those snacks that tend to be like so calorie dense but not filling, or oils or processed foods or emotional eating and binge eating, or just a really sedentary lifestyle make it hard because your body just doesn't need as much and it's really hard to eat that little all the time. So the biggest thing is understanding it's this idea of managing your calories in versus your energy out, and being really mindful of that because the body will work because it really wants to fight against losing weight. It'll work in a lot of different ways. Like say you lower calories, it'll be like, ooh, less energy is coming in, so I'm gonna subconsciously lower the amount of movement I'm doing, like the fidgeting, the pacing, the talking with my hands, so that my body's conserving that energy. So then sometimes to make up for that, that's why we have to add in a bit more intentional movement to make up for the subconscious lowering of our movement. And you'll see some people here, they're like, man, they can eat whatever they want and like they never gain weight. They might be kind of naturally, if they eat more, their body just expends more energy to burn it because it's happy with where it's at. It likes to keep your body kind of steady. So you'll probably see those people are really fidgety or they talk a lot with their hands or things like that, or they have a job where they're moving versus they're just sedentary all day. Like sometimes if we have a desk job, thank you, get up in the morning. You sit at your desk to have breakfast, then you sit in the car to get to work, then you sit at work, and then you sit for lunch, and then you sit for work again, and then you drive home, and then you sit for dinner, and then you sit to watch TV, and then you lay down to go to bed. So it's when we live in a lifestyle like that, it's very easy to like overeat more than our needs, even when it doesn't feel like we're eating a ton. So doing some detective work, getting into the mindfulness side of things, it will be helpful. Okay, so now that I totally gave you all the gray areas of like there's millions of ways, but what matters most is finding a calorie deficit. And how do you know if you're in a calorie deficit is if you're losing weight or losing inches over a period of time. What tends to happen is it gets really frustrating because every time we step on the scale, it's all over the place. So what's most important is being consistent and also finding the averages. Like say you weigh yourself every day, then over a week, add those all up, divide it by 7, and that's your weekly average. And then do the same the next week and the next week and the next week. And if you see it slowly start to trend down like the averages, then you know you're like, okay, that is like physiological proof that I am in a calorie deficit. If you see it trending up over the weeks, then that is physiological proof that your body is getting more than it needs. So the mindfulness and the like, we can't monitor what we don't measure. So those things will take out the guesswork and be like, okay, what I'm doing is working or what I'm doing is not. But we can't go day by day and go like, oh shoot, oh yeah, it's working. Let's celebrate. Oh no, it's not working. I'm going to be upset and I'm going to restrict more. Like you got to give it time and consistency and then compare the averages. So I'm just going to quickly jot over a couple things that like make things easier and makes things harder. So when it comes to being a deficit, hunger is one of those things that can make it hard to stick to because we get hungry and then we end up eating. Um, So, some of the things that minimize those feelings of hunger is higher protein, higher fiber, high volume foods, those ones that are like hydrating and they take a lot of chewing and they like make you physically full. And then balanced meals of having like fats, proteins, and carbs and fibers at every meal so that your energy levels are consistent. So that's a tool to help with hunger. Emotional eating can make it ha hard because it's very easy. You know how you like get into that 1,000 calorie deficit by Thursday? It's very easy with ultra hyper processed foods and things like alcohol and things like that to add up to 1,000 calories like without even noticing it. So really finding other tactics to deal with emotional eating is imperative and helpful, getting the support you need to like work through that and other tools. And honestly, your environment makes a big difference. Being surrounded by people who have the same goals as you, setting it up so that the stuff you see on social media is helpful and supportive and not creating more stress in your life, setting up your environment so it's not this big mental battle of like, ooh, I should have that, but I can't or I don't want to. Like having it out of your view is helpful so that you can go and get those things when you want it and not just because it's a habit. Like most of our day is subconscious. So we want to set up our environment so that our subconscious habits are like bringing us in the direction we want. And then the other thing that tends to make things harder to with consistency, which is like the magic bullet, is feeling restricted and feeling out of control around food. Because then we just get an F it moment, whatever, and then we have that like off track weekend, and then it feels like we're starting over, and that cycle like continues. So when it comes to that, our words are really important. And having the right intention behind why we're tackling these goals can make it feel not restrictive, but more of an abundance. Like, man, I'm so excited to like see how my body feels when I treat it this way. Or I'm really stoked to see like, okay, what are the differences if I don't do this or I do this? It's not like a willpower restrict white knuckling it, relying on motivation thing. So we don't feel restricted. Even if we say no to like those donuts that are in the office, it doesn't feel restrictive because we're like, no, like I'm on this journey to see how my body feels whenever I nourish it this way. It's not like, oh, I want that and I can't have it. You're like, no, what you want is to experiment and see what it feels like to shift your body composition. And so you're stoked to make that decision. It's not like a lack envious thing. And then, whenever we were on that path of, so these are things that impact the energy in. And then the things that help impact our energy out is like movement, getting those steps in, pacing around the house if you're on calls versus staying sedentary, and building muscle because muscle tissue takes energy to maintain. So those are little hacks of like making it easier to be in a deficit because you're bringing your metabolism up. So being in a deficit instead of having to be down here at 1,600 calories, you get to be in a deficit at 1,800 because now you're asking your body it's like now at 2,300 to maintain it. So then it feels like you get to eat a lot more while also technically still being in a deficit to see changes. Now, I'm going to stop this screen share and I'll stop the recording and then I'll hop on for a few little questions. Ooh, yeah.